This is a Culture Inject production.
Shall I move on to episode 4? Are we all good? So we're left questioning who killed Mary, because we saw the gunman get released, but like it was like kind of this who did it, and we had our theories. We thought that it might have been Lavinia, but obviously we learned that it was Masson. Yeah, I didn't actually take much from this episode on a rewatch.
But I will say at the very end, that little message, that just the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb, when they translated the message, I think when she was saying, "Come below and find me, come before the dark and we can save," I think it was going to end, "We can save the future."
Right, yeah.
I feel like we can make that.
Yeah, I think the assumption is it's going to save the world or the future or whatever. The other thing that stuck out with me with the end speech before, you know, we only knew so much, but now after watching the end episode, Harriet reads out, "My lonely soldier, something about wearing stripes."
Oh, so yeah.
Which we now know, obviously, Amalia was Zephyr, who was a soldier, and she was Stripes. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense. But back then it was just kind of like, you know, Harriet's like, oh, and then it was something about wearing stripes. They weren't sure what had been said, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. Also, just on the, she says that the song, most of it was about emotion or semantics, which is the meaning of language. And picking up on what I said earlier about like empaths and possibly telepathy. So, you know, the Galanthi are empathetic and seem really emotionally connected to people as opposed to actually communicating via speech. So it's interesting that she said that the song, most of it was about emotion or semantics. And a lot of time it is, you know, in language, it's not necessarily exactly what you're saying, but how you're saying and what the meaning is behind what you're saying.
That just makes me think of the HBO like making of behind the scenes that they play at the end of this one. They focused on how they wrote Myrtle's lines for a lot of it, and it plays into that. They were like, you know, you can pick the most emotional word from any language that you can pick, and it's, you know, not necessarily about the word and how it sounds, but it's like which one conveys the most that they're trying to convey through Myrtle's lines.
I will say about this episode that when I first saw it, and there was that scene with Masson kind of confessing that, or not confessing, but confessing. And I didn't think that Masson was the one responsible, but it sure seemed like the characters thought that Masson could be the one responsible for killing Mary. And at the time, I didn't really think the whole, the blowing up the factory thing, it didn't really click to me as like why that it wasn't satisfactory that, oh, we're gonna go blow up some crates or something to get back at him for killing Mary in this heartbreaking scene. It just felt unsatisfactory to me. But now, like, I literally just had this click looking back on it, that in the beginning of episode 4, when they were kind of like intercutting between the funeral and the dudes on the dock with the bombs, I just realized that blowing up those bombs at the very end is kind of like a full circle getting back at him because of what those bombs represented, which was a whole bunch of caskets as opposed to just Mary's casket. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting jumbled a little bit.
No, there's definitely something there, and I think you're on the right track with that thinking for sure, because that is so purposeful, putting those two scenes together. And I spend a long time in one of my YouTube videos going into like which shots are intercut with which shots, and what the song they're actually singing is about something to do with workers and being managed by somebody above you and like living your own life kind of thing. So all that put together, I do think that it's a full circle moment for sure.
Also, I was a bit disappointed that I guess they're going to put Penance and Augustus together.
I'm actually
like
I'm so here for it.
Really?
Mostly because I think one of them's going to die, but that might just be because I'm used to the Whedon bring them together and kill them, and I think it's going to be Augustus. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, that's what I said, that I think they're like the innocence, don't we, of the show. They're kind of just these two perfectly lovely people that you want to be happy. But like I say, it's not always that predictable in a Whedon show.
I think they're so cute, though. I mean, the way that she talks, like, she's such a nerd about electricity, and he's, like, such a nerd about birds, and he, like, relates the birds. It's just so funny. Like, I get so much joy in their scenes every time.
Yeah, I think maybe I just got too attached to the idea of Penance and Amalia together. That feels like more of because the Augustus is so conventional. I was excited about the idea that these two female characters are so into each other and there's this relationship, but I guess it's platonic.
Well, what's so interesting about that is, like, I would be so here for, like, an Amalia Penance romance, but there is something that I absolutely love about two people, regardless of gender, that have a relationship that is so loving but is not sexual at all. I don't know if anybody's into the show Steven Universe at all, but it uses a lot of these metaphors of these beings that confuse with each other, and it's a metaphor for sex. It's a children's TV show too, but they have two characters that can't fuse together or can't have sex, but have like a very, very touching, emotionally involved relationship where it is basically a relationship, but it is not in any sense of the word sexual. And it goes into kind of like this, you know, this platonic love that two people can have that's more than a friendship, but less than a romance, but kind of walks the line.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the dragon soul bonding episode of Rick and Morty.
I've emerged from my cum cocoon.
No, I really love relationships in TV shows that you never ever think they're going to get together. And they're just, and these are like the perfect example. And like I say, I feel like they trust each other so much and they're like both each other's favorite people in the whole world, but there's never like an inkling of, any kind of romantic engagement, which is nice because it takes away that question. I think there's a lot of shows that hold the same as like what we were saying at the beginning with questions, when you're questioning something and they can hold you through an entire TV show because you want to know the answer to that question. The same happens with characters and their relationships, and you think that the kind of end goal is you want to see those characters together, and that's like one of the main reasons you watch the show, whereas I don't think this show has that. We've kind of seen how close they are as friends and just, you know, there's nothing there but love. But and all the other characters are kind of already, you know, Horatio and Amalia been together, not been together, kind of together, but not. Yeah, I just enjoy just characters being able to be who they are without there being this question and this hope that they're gonna get together or whatever, because it's really not like that important when it comes to the characters themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I wouldn't mind it, and maybe the only reason that I'm like a little bit on the side of Amalia and Penance staying platonic is because, you know, I've gotten my Xena and Gabrielle in Xena, and they did that for like, you know, 5-6 years or however long that show was on. So I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to explore it without the romance.
I guess the major thing in this episode was the whole Lucy thing. Lucy says, "How do you know how it's supposed to be?" Which we obviously know is because she's from the future and she knows where the future goes. And she's really kind of like battling. She says like stuff along the lines of, you know, I'm trying to change it, or this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't what I've kind of been doing. She's really questioning like herself and the mission and what she's kind of there for. Yeah,
absolutely. And she's also, you know, tying into the whole, like, this isn't how the Galati did it last time. She literally is like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So another moment that makes more sense once you see it.
Yeah.
The Lucy thing kind of, for me, mirrors in episode 6, the kind of that dude who betrays or turncoats on his own group of friends after getting convinced by the free lifer that the Galati is a threat. Because both of them, like Lucy and that guy in the very last episode, both of them turn on their own people, and in both situations that results in the assassination of Mary and Knitter, who are both symbols of hope in their respective time eras. And
now that you mention it, they're both shot kind of similarly.
Exactly, yeah.
About Lucy and the relationship they share, and like you say about her betraying them, she's so like into the fact that she's the first woman and, you know, was someone who could really be a friend and be there for her. In episode 2, when they're going to the party, she wants Lucy to go because she's the muscle. And she also says, I'm sure Lavinia has security, but Lucy's ours. And it's like, oh, that hits so hard now, that line, because it's like, because at that time, she's not yours, but she so believes that she is. So it just really, really escalates the betrayal level. Because for Amalia, you know, to probably trust someone after going through everything like that we see in the future, where she seems to be more of like a loner, you know, to trust someone and then be betrayed. Yeah, it's pretty hard-hitting stuff.
Yep, they both get bullets and betrayal.
Yep.
Okay, so we were on episode 5.
Yes. So I think this was a complete mind blow episode.
Yeah, this one was definitely interesting. I mean, down to learning about the production problems they had with, you know, COVID happening and having to kind of change how things go. Also having the knowledge of Effie Boyle being Malady the whole time, because I knew it was the same actress. The way it was all done was really, really well done.
So I felt like a complete idiot after I watched this episode because everybody knew that the Effie Boyle was Malady, but I had no idea whatsoever. Maybe I'm just blind, but I didn't see the visual resemblance. I didn't hear the resemblance. So when that plot twist happened, it completely whiplash would be the word to use. But
that's so funny. Did you guys not mention it on the podcast or like?
No, Laura mentioned it, and that's the first time that idea was introduced to me.
Well, what's so good about the Malady moment? You know, like I was saying before, how she can put on a show and kind of convince people that she is pretty sane when she is pretty insane to begin with. The reveal works in two ways because it reveals, somebody that's binge watching it might not realize that it's the same actress. So that is a shock. But the shock in the reveal to me, knowing that it was probably the same person, was that she had the ability to appear sane like that and be calculated and have a plan. And so it works on multiple different levels, I think.
Yeah, also, like, when I first thought to myself, that's her, I didn't just immediately think, oh, she must have switched places with her minion. I was like, has she got some hidden ability to like double herself? Or, do you know what I mean? I was questioning a whole lot of things. So at the end when it's like, oh, it was just like a simple, very well thought out switcheroo. It was like, oh wow, Malady is so smart.
Totally. And the moment, now that I'm thinking back to a previous episode, the moment that like made me think the same thing, because I was doing the same thing you were doing, Laura, where I was like, does she have a hidden ability? Can she double herself? I was thinking like maybe she had. There's an episode of Buffy where Xander's hit with the like this magical wand that splits his personality into two, and like the bad traits go to one and the good traits go to the other. And I thought maybe that's something she could do. But the line that like really had me going was when she goes to see Frank in his office, and she says, "I was in the box with Mary while they were burying her."
Yeah.
And so I kept being like, maybe she can teleport herself, because I'm still to this day sitting there going, how did she manage to get out of that funeral box without anybody seeing her? Because I don't know if funerals like work differently in the Victorian era, but isn't there usually like they start like covering the body almost immediately, because you normally, you take turns and you put the dirt on them, and then the grave diggers come and they just fill in it. So like,
yeah.
Did she just like pop out in front of all these people? It was like, hey, or did she like kill them all? If she did kill them all, which she probably didn't, because we know she only kills certain people, like, wouldn't people have heard about that? Like, hey, there was this crazy bitch that just jumped out of this coffin. Like, so that was something that like really threw my head for a loop. And now I just think it is just like a silly throwaway line where like it's just showing how like crazy she is.
Yeah, I had the same idea of you about the split personality thing. Yeah, I did think to myself, maybe, yeah, when she got like her turn, it was like it split her personality. So her sane self went one way and her like insane self went the other, and they both went to like the extremes. Yeah.
And even the fact that Effie Boyle's murder is the first murder that we see, and if I'm being honest, that was the one scene that I was like, okay, this scene like didn't really like tickle my brain at all or like make me interested. I was confused because I was like, who's this random person that's murdered that like is also introducing Frank's character for the first time? So having that be Effie's murder scene was really good because it was like such an underplayed scene that I like took for granted until, Effie Boyle points out that she's wearing the same clothes. And in that scene, she actually kind of catches herself because she's like, she's dressed like and she was going to say like a journalist, like a reporter, or that's how I saw it. But she says she's dressed like a secretary, like something other than that. She even says in that scene, like, I have the same outfit. I have the same cut of the same outfit. Like, she corrects herself,
I also like how, obviously, in episode 1, Mundy's like this, like, he's adamant this wasn't Malady because the body's been moved and it had no kind of, like, she didn't do the writing. He knew that one of them had done it to kind of cover up this murder, even though it turns out they didn't have anything to do with the murder. They've obviously just found this body down there. But she's obviously put it there to make it, like, kind of throw the police off the scent, and it worked completely.
Yeah, not only for the characters, but for me as a viewer as well.
Yeah, but you're right, in watching the first episode, it is kind of randomly slot in there, and it is kind of taken as just to introduce Mundy, but now we know that it wasn't just to introduce him, but the body of Effie Boyle.
Wait, so do you guys think that she purposely misspelled that message written in blood with pig's blood to misdirect Frank Mundy? Or do you think it's not mutually exclusive that, yes, she's the one who committed the murder, and also, yes, the workers down there were trying to pin it on her because they don't like her or the touch?
I think my first thought is that it was still the guys that did it, not necessarily to pin it on Malady, but just to throw the scent off that the police might have thought it was one of them. But at the same time, it definitely could have been Malady throwing them off the scent even more.
After seeing her Effie Boyle thing, it's definitely, I can believe that, because like she's like the Joker at this point, and I know a lot of people have kind of made that comparison with her taking that wig off like that and laughing at the end, but it's so cool. Like she's that archetype now of the trickster, of the one who wants to see unjust society bleed. There is a righteousness in that I don't think is just crazy, but it's anarchic and it's crazy. It's crazy in an ordered way. Like, there's an agenda she has. She definitely has a lot of space to grow into a character with agency and with, interactions, and who can be on the screen for more than 10 seconds at a time.
Yeah, and what I'm super curious about is if Malady was responsible for the murder of Effie Boyle, which the only reason that it, begs a question is because we know she kind of has an MO with who she goes after, the angels and the doctors. I want to know what Effie was reporting on when she was Effie Boyle. If she was in fact a reporter, which I'm assuming that she was, and was it something that Malady felt she needed to do this and take her over, or was it just an opportunity she felt she had? Because that's something I'm very curious. I don't know if they'll ever answer it about what Effie was actually doing, but
she was actually a really good journalist, because we see that piece that she wrote in the very end, and Desiree the Blodgett reads it, and it's very compelling work.
Yeah, I liked that when they say, when they're praising it. And then you're like, oh, you don't know that it's written by Malady.
And that article said something like, if we allow this hanging to happen, then we all become Maladies ourselves, which is really interesting. Because I'm also thinking now, like, how did she choose the name Malady? Like, how did that come about for her personally? I don't know why it made me think of that.
Malady feels like a very old-fashioned word. It is phonetically very similar to Amalia, and those two characters are very familiar. They're kind of like competing prophets in the sense that Malady's the one who saw God and is trying to make everyone believe her, but nobody does. Whereas Amalia's the one who has visions of the future, and we're just they betray each other, and we're trying to see who's the leader, who's not the leader. Amalia's shown to be not the best leader in general, so there's something that's lacking. But I do think that just the word malady in general, which means like an outbreak of a disease, I think it lends itself very organically to that era, because the craziness, the crime, the violence, it can feel like an epidemic or something that's breaking out or something something that's a sickness as a result of that, you know? So the word malady feels like a really insensitive journalist or something in the press kind of coined that, and it stuck. That's just my theory.
I think we were hoping at some point whilst watching it that there'd be some crazy where it is like an anagram and the words all jumble up, you know, like in Harry Potter, and it's like, I am Tom Riddle, or I am Lord Voldemort, you know, and it all just jumbles up and reveals, and you're like, oh my god, it was there the whole time. But yeah, I don't know. I felt like we was waiting for a reveal like that, but instead we got a physical reveal of her becoming, well, going back from Effie Boyle and turning back into herself. And I love her mad little la that she does at the end. She does it in the first episode, and she does it at the end of this episode, which is basically like the start of her journey and the end of what we see so far in this 6th episode. So it's quite cool.
And I could rewatch the scene of, now that we know it's not Malady, but Malady's henchman hanging herself. Like, I thought there was something about it that was so funny, because like the way that she jumps, and I've rewatched it many times, she like does this little kick with her feet, like, you know, like when like a little kid like jumps up and clicks their heels together on the side. She like dives into this, like, you know, hanging, and now we know she like feels as though she has to do it, which makes a lot of sense. But like, I love that little moment. Yeah,
it's like this henchman who's so, I mean, she's convinced that this is her one thing that she can do to help and to like kind of move to a higher plane, or, you know, she wanted to be one of the touched and she wasn't, and this is the only way that she can help someone who she sees as like a higher power, because she knows that Malady has spoken to God or heard God, and that's her connection. So yeah, to have someone who's like so willing to literally jump into death for you. And the other guy...
That's exactly true. She wants so badly to be touched, and she says in that prison cell, I'm your instrument, why aren't you playing me? And presumably she's talking to God, and she wants so badly to be touched, and yeah, you're right.
What's interesting too is the two henchmen actually in, I think it's episode 2, when they're talking to Mary, they leave the scene because they mentioned they're late for church. And it is the henchman that the henchwoman that ends up hanging herself in Malady's place. And I was so curious about like what church is, like, because they know that Malady's in the room. So like where exactly are they going, and what is church to them? Or is it actually church? And it probably is. It's just so interesting that they're like, we're late for church, we gotta go.
Yeah. I think it's just the contrast of they start off in this little attic where they have someone imprisoned and they're torturing them, and then they got to go off to church.
Yeah, it's one of those Jada Spencer lines I was talking about, where you end on a funny note, the scene.
Yeah, and I ended this episode, I think I mentioned before, I thought that the next episode was simply going to be like, the first half was going to be us seeing what they got up to, the other team underground, and then like the second half, Amalia and everyone kind of like talking in more depth about what the Galati are and what they've discovered underground and stuff. So to be thrown straight away into like the future, I wasn't shocked necessarily, but it was kind of like, oh, okay, we're doing this.
I was so unprepared for that. I mean, I knew it was a possibility, and me too. I was like so innocent when I think back to being like, yeah, we're going to see what they're doing on the other side. Like, it'd be so nice to get that. And then the opening shot immediately like put that all to shame. And I was like, okay, like I was not ready. Let's go.
So I guess that's a good segue into episode 6.
As we said, it opens in a desolate future city, and you've got the Planetary Defense Coalition, and then you've got the Free Life. So I was a little bit confused when I first watched it. On a second watch, I'm kind of like, okay, this makes a bit more sense. But I was getting a little bit confused over like the names that they're giving themselves, like Stripe and Boot. And, you know, like you mentioned earlier, it's like names to do with what they do, as opposed to names that kind of represent who they are as a person. Yeah, the world itself is pretty interesting. My question is still when it's set. Kind of like, how far in the future is this? Because it could be, if we're assuming that the future before she goes back in time is like exactly our world as it is, but we can't necessarily assume that because it's a fictional TV show. So things could have advanced.
Yeah, it's not a documentary.
Yeah, things could have advanced more, and it could be now or before, or it's further in the future, or it's now, but because they've had the technology from the Galati, that's why they've got crazy looking ships and stuff like that, and better technology.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my big questions was how far in the future exactly is this? You know, is the entire planet like this, or is it just the city that we're seeing? And then, you know, a little bit even further than that, I was like, is this even Earth? Which I am 98% positive that it probably is. But there is a sci-fi trope where you'll have like an Earth that's not Earth with the same names, like, you know, like New Edinburgh or something. And that's kind of like a trope. So I was like, we don't know for sure if this is actually even on the same planet. I'm leaning towards that. But yeah, a burning question I have is how far in the future is this?
Okay, here's my crazy theory. I think that it's 1939 or 1945, around that area. Because I think like the Great War that we're seeing between PDC and the Free Lifers feels to me like a historic parallel to World War II and the worst possible World War II that could have been. And maybe that's just a historic parallel that's, you know, supposed to stand in for a future at like 3000 AD or something. But with the whole thing where the nukes were going to fly around on that bunker at the end, like the Free Lifers had called in the nukes, and then the anxiety of the turn of the century where we're kind of building up to this conflict and all of this tension, and it's like the world is in this pressure cooker that's waiting to implode with World War I, which dovetails into World War II. I think, and when Lavinia talks about war and when Masson talks about war, I think that's the war that they're foreshadowing, historically at least. The world wars that are about to come. And then what this show does, and what's so amazing about science fiction, is it takes these real world things and it can put them in the prism of fiction and fantasy and, you know, spaceships and dragons and stuff. So we can examine it, but we're kind of at a distance from it. So we're not so, you know, attached emotionally. And we can just say, oh, it's like a Terminator thing.
I never even thought, I mean, you just kind of opened up my mind a little bit of being like, this is like 1945 or like somewhere around there, because what I immediately thought of was, what if the show is doing this thing where that was, you know, the worst possible example of what can happen in that situation, and the touched in the past is leading towards like where we are now? Like we are currently existing as people in the universe that was fixed by the Galati way back in the day, and like could do something really cool with that, where it leads to this, you know, we got all our problems anyway that we're dealing with, which the show is touching on. But I was like, you know, that could be an interesting thing that they're doing.
That would be awesome.
Right?
That would be really cool. Yeah.
Because I'm convinced that they definitely know where it's going and what's happening for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, like an alternate reality 1945, where the technology is better, the culture is different. 5 billion people died apparently, and it might have just been, you know, like in our own history, there were 2 atomic bombs dropped, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and if that led to a chain reaction of retaliations, if there was the technology more widespread and ubiquitous than it was, because at that time America had the monopoly on atomic technology. So, you know, in an alternate reality where everybody has that and it's used, then why wouldn't there be retaliation? Why wouldn't most of the world be incinerated? It's crazy to think about.
For sure. I was like, what if, you know, people being instilled with this knowledge of Galati technology ultimately ended with their demise, and that's why the Galati was so adamant about leaving, where they were like, oops, made a mistake. We shouldn't have given them all this information. And now this Galanti's like, okay, we're not going to do that. Again, I keep going back to this rogue Galati theory.
I think that the Galati was sent to just help out and that. But humans as humans are, know better and have the Masson mindset of, or at least half the population of the world for sure has the Masson mindset of like, this is just the way the world is, and even if it's shit and terrible stuff happens, it's just the way it is, and that's their answer to everything. And the other half of the world is pro-Galati because they know that change is a possibility and that the world can be a better place. And it's literally just like the two worlds, like the two sides divided, and they just completely clash and obliterate the planet.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's definitely like just the way the world is.
Yeah, that Masson mindset probably evolves into the free lifer platform, resist change.
Absolutely. And I actually think there is one line in episode 6 that I thought was really interesting, and it's when Stripe says, "Free life owns history." The man who holds the stick is the one that does what, controls everything. And I am also on the side, Chirag, that I think that the Doctor and I think Lavinia are from the future, and they're both part of free life. And I think that the idea with free life is that maybe they had the ability to go back in time all this time, but like they have always existed and they will always exist. And free life, whether or not it's called free life, is just the system, the people in charge,
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would only say that I feel like Lavinia, I don't think she's necessarily free life. I think maybe she's being manipulated by Dr. Haig, because that scene that she has in the cafe with her brother, where they're talking about their childhood, it seems like a very human thing, and she has a lot of distrust for everybody altogether. We don't really know what her agenda is, but like when you mentioned the Shakespearean reference, that blew my mind, because I feel like now she is going to be a tragic character.
Oh, absolutely. I have thought from the beginning that Lavinia's plan is because of that conversation she has with Augie in the restaurant where she mentions that they all went ice skating with Swan when they were younger, I immediately thought, oh my God, was she always in this wheelchair? Was she born this way? Was she not born this way? And I could totally understand how somebody like Lavinia believes that she should have been touched, because she sees the touch as a cure for some of these things. So she probably has the mindset like, if the spores hit me, I'd be able to walk again. So she wants to find the cure to like kind of artificially create touch and hopefully help herself.
Yeah, that's interesting. The contrast between her and Masson, where Masson wants to cure the touched and Lavinia wants to use the touch to cure herself.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, different reasonings working together. Neither of them knows exactly what the other wants.
Yeah, I haven't thought about Lavinia also being from the future, but yeah, I'm with the whole she's trying to find a cure thing, or she's trying to find how they work because she wants to be one of the touched to at least be able to walk again. Like, that's her goal. She obviously misses that life, and, that's one of her end goals. But when the Galati orb cracks, she instantly is just like, kill it. Because, she has that thing of like, this is war. And as soon as it makes a move, as such, whether it's conscious or not, and it cracks, her first thing is to kill it. Whether she thinks it's going to help her or what her goal is, she just says kill it, which is very like what the Free Lifers are doing in the future. They're trying to kill all the Galanthi, even though, as seemingly as we know, they're there to help the planet and stop global warming and help the humans. That's their instinct, is to just kill them because, they're doing things that are not what they want them to do, She's experimenting on this thing, trying to dig it out the ground, but it cracks. It does something of its own free will, possibly, and her first instinct is to kill it.
Which is interesting, because she's all about change and progressivism. She's cool with, the English language, taking a French vacation and all that type of stuff. But where the Galanthi does represent change and hope, for her, it doesn't represent that. I think that is a piece of evidence for the argument that she's misinterpreting everything. She might be getting manipulated by Haig or by something. I don't know. I'm not sure what her agenda really is in fearing the Galanthi. Because Masson doesn't like the Galanthi because it represents, or I guess the Free Lifers don't like it, because it represents change in power dynamics, because it will change the status quo that they're benefiting from. But I don't know what Lavinia does.
I don't know if you guys also picked up on this, but Lavinia had this weird, interesting thing that happened along her storyline where she has that whole scene where she's talking to the doctor in the basement and they're both looking at the orb and they're covering their eyes every time it's glowing, and it ends with the doctor looking at the orb. So it's insinuated that both of them at some point had looked at this. The only other person that like they really focus on looking at the orb was Malady when the ship was coming over, that she looked at it and like something happened to her brain. And what I thought was really interesting was Malady's first monologue. She says to all of them, you were all wearing your hats. You had your hats on, something about hats. And then Lavinia, when she's having that scene with Augie later, where they're talking about the ice skating and she freaks out on the couple behind them that are excited about Malady's hanging, she says, watch out, Augie, there's vultures everywhere, all dressed up in hats. So I don't know if like the Galati, even just like looking at it does something to your brain, but there was a moment where I was like, that has to be something purposeful, that her mind has shifted because of this experience about being around the Galati in general, which is very different than her saying kill it, you know?
That's a very interesting thing, yeah, because her behavior in the cafe, she was having the headaches and is very much, I think it is also the idea that anybody in the Bible who sees God doesn't survive it. And like Malady believes that she saw God. And
yeah, isn't there a whole saying that's like to know God is to know madness?
Yeah, something like that. You can never be the same person you were before. You're a new person once you've seen that light, or you've had that revelation, or Moses sees the burning bush, or whatever it is. It's a death and a rebirth, mythologically. I think she's doomed for sure with those headaches.
Right?
Anytime. Yeah, it's like in a disaster movie, when someone coughs, you know they're going to die. It's that kind of thing.
Also, though, I know we picked up that there might be something between her and Dr. Haig, whether that's like past relations or what, but is she just clearly being manipulated by him? Like, she's this rich, powerful person, and he's a doctor who wants to do these experiments, and he's possibly from the future and wants to like kill this thing or do whatever to possibly, like, if it has the potential to time travel and he wants to get back to his time, or, you know, whatever he wants to do, is he just manipulating her to get what he wants? At which point he wouldn't care about her well-being, well, at least once he's got whatever his end goal is. So if she dies, it's like, you know, no biggie.
Yeah, he's the only one that we've seen her be weirdly vulnerable and sensual with. Like, they were very touchy and feely with each other in that scene.
So then we have the whole chapter 2 where we see Molly. So Molly's obviously extremely different to Amalia. We learn that she's a baker. We learn everything about her past and the husband, the abusive husband that was mentioned in the first episode. And we obviously eventually see her death.
What a gorgeous sequence, too. I think I thought chapter 2 was like the standout for me in that episode. I thought it was so perfectly done. I mean, first you get, you know, the 20 minutes of only knowing Knitter, and I found myself oddly emotional when she was shot, and then to find myself even more emotional, even on a rewatch, like it actually like brings tears to my eyes when I'm watching the Molly story, and it's only 10 minutes, and it's like I completely understand what she went through, what she had to do, and they do it in this way that is like little vignettes of life. And I, you know, not that I necessarily read anything or had other theories from that scene, but I just thought it was really, really powerful. Yeah, I mean, like the one of the opening shots of that chapter 2 is her baking those little French pastries, and she's setting them up, and they look beautiful and very delicious. And the last thing she does is, you know, remakes those, and they're all like deflated, and she's treating them with just as much care, but it's like she can't even produce the thing that she wanted to produce. And I thought that was so well done.
I think... Oh, you go ahead.
Because I was going to say, I do think the main takeaway from that chapter was her hearing the God has plans for us. Because that is one of the things she keeps hearing the whole time. And Molly's response back is, oh no, she says God has her plans for us. And then the doctor says to her, I think that God has already written our stories before we've even come along. And it seems to be that that's kind of the moment that she contemplates. I don't think she actually decides to kill herself until she's in the alleyway, but she definitely contemplates it in that moment, feeling as though it's pointless.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those, the last thing, because you see her several times looking that way as if she's thinking about it, but only after that is she then kind of thought, maybe this is it.
And, you know, had she gone with her gut and, you know, gone for that Varnum guy who she really liked, we never would have gotten all the machinery that, you know, all the cogs that turned so that Zephyr came into this body in this situation around these people. It would have been completely different.
Yeah, that plays into your butterfly effect thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do think it's really telling that, you know, Molly is the complete absence of hope at that moment that she you know, commits suicide, and Zephyr also committed suicide and had the complete absence of hope, and to like bring those two characters together, which is why I think it has something to do with this. You can't artificially create hope in somebody. You need to allow them to build it and create a foundation, because the hope isn't as strong if it's like given to you by somebody else.
I think that's Zephyr's story, isn't it? It's kind of like she seemed to have given up hope or not really had anything to fight for. She meets Nita and sees kind of how hopeful she is, and it's her bond with her, even in that very short time that they know each other. I feel like they share a bond, and you know, it's like the parallel to Amalia and Penance, and that now when she's sent to the past, she has that hope once stuff starts to get going. Especially in the later episodes, Amalia talks about hope a lot, and it's like she's taken on that responsibility from Nita, and at first it was like it wasn't her mission, you know, she doesn't know why she's there, but as time goes on she kind of gets to grips with that more and more.
Yeah, and I think the show is really her journey to really recovering hope. Because, like, she tastes it again with Mary's song, and then we see what happens to Mary, and that the death of Mary, the death of hope, and then how do you keep it going in those circumstances? How do you resurrect? You can't resurrect Mary for sure, but you can keep her, I guess, message alive.
I think you mentioned earlier, in possibly the first episode, when we mentioned Amalia or Molly taking her life, that do you think that they switched places, or just that Zephyr's soul was put into?
That would be hilarious. If it was like a Freaky Friday situation and the second half of the season is Molly waking up in this soldier's body in this apocalypse, like this meek baker lady waking up in the soldier.
Oh my god, awesome. Let Molly rest. She's been through too much. You can't just throw her into that.
I feel like I heard you say it and I was like, did he just say that he thinks they've switched places? Because like it hadn't entered my mind. Because, like you say, I feel like the Galanthy know that Molly had given up and she was done. And there was this empty vessel. You're right, that to pull Molly into Zephyr's body would be a bit cruel. Like, oh, you had a really bad life already. Well, welcome to the apocalypse.
No, but I think that Amalia is the coming together of Molly and Zephyr, because like you said, Tyler, they both had lost hope. That now they're both coming together, soul and body and mind. And I think moving forward into the next part of the season, more of Molly is going to come out in Amalia. Like she's going to have to deal with more of Molly's life, I think.
Absolutely. I was going to say the moment where True is sitting at the table and Penance asks her how it went, and she says it was good. I kept saying she seems so heavy. Either she didn't get the answer that she wanted, and I do think in the moment, you know, that Amalia is with the Galanthy and she has her vision that she is receiving the memories of Molly that she didn't have previously, or at least Molly's life. And I think that she like felt like she lived it in that moment. So her emotional state is like, wow, I just lived a lifetime and I know whose body I now possess. And before that, she didn't have a relationship to the body. She didn't know anything about this person that she had taken over. So I do think that is going to be a significant change when we come back, is that Amalia will be aware of what happened to Molly for sure.
That's exactly true. Because in that scene, Amalia was asking, who am I? Like, what body is this? And like, the Galanthy kind of consummates Zephyr's consciousness with the body of Molly and the mind of Molly and the experiences of Molly. And I think I mentioned this in the last episode. To me, Molly really represents the traditional woman. You know, the traditional woman who wanted children and a family and, you know, who wanted to fit into that feminine role of the mother figure and, you know, this and that. Whereas Zephyr is more of the modern woman who's dealing with these crazy apocalyptic things that we don't even know how to wrap our heads around. Like in the world we live in today, women have to deal with a whole different society than men have to deal with. It's a metaphor for a different reality, and the coming together of traditional and modern into one kind of yin yang, just complete woman who will become Amalia, self-realized, you know. And it also gives me flashbacks to Dollhouse, like you were talking about, with the whole thing, like, what is my relationship to my body and my identity? Who am I? When you wipe away everything that I am, what remains? Who am I really? Some interesting stuff.
The more I think about, like, the parallels to the themes in the other shows, I'm like, this is kind of like a magnum opus of sorts of, like, all these ideas that have been played with in all these other shows, that it seems like a natural progression that this is where it would go.
Questions for what's going to come next is definitely kind of the big thing.
I think they're going to go to the future. That's my theory.
She's going to tell everyone at the orphanage what's going on, and they're all going to, like, get on a ship or a time... I said this earlier, actually, because I watched the 6th episode again, and I was like, it'd be really funny if the next episode just starts and Penance is like, you know, I built a time machine. Just, like, straight off. She stayed up all night. She built a time machine.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised with how the show kind of, like, does that sometimes, which I love. What's funny is I had the same thing where I was like, are we going to go into the future? Like, how soon are we going to go into the future? And there is a piece of me that's like, I would love for episode 6 to kind of be its own thing for a little while before we, like, go into this future setting, like maybe way down the road. But I don't expect it to happen in the next 6 episodes. And if it does, it might be like a flashback of sorts to, like, maybe a memory that Amalia has, so it's like a flashback to the future kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I kind of like it being this little, like, sprinkle of, like, this is the mythology of the show, but, like, I did fall in love with it because of the Victorian ideas behind it, you know, so this is just, like, added spice, if you will.
Yeah, I keep seeing a lot of reviews that are like, oh, it was a terrible show until the 6th episode, and then it got interesting, and then people want to see more, but like, is it too little too late? I'm thinking to myself, what? No, the first 5 episodes were amazing. What were you watching? Like, you know, this, or at least for me, I felt like if it had never gone into the future and it was just this cool Victorian times and everything was, like, just in that time, it's super, super interesting. But now with this extra layer, I'm still very interested. I would like to see snippets, like you say, almost if it's, like Zephyr's, I don't know, a dream or reminiscing or a flashback of how the Galanthe arrived and how everything spiraled downhill, which could be done in, like, a montage flashback, like, not super delved into. But yeah, I kind of don't want it to be like Dollhouse, where it's like, here's a series and at the end we have the epitaph episode of the future. Then here's another series with another episode in the future. But I think that, because that series takes place, you know, the second series is like a year maybe, it's not that far in the future. Whereas what we're talking about here is so far in the future, possibly, depending on when it is. It could be 40 years or it could be, you know, we're not sure, present times. Because it's a much bigger time span. I feel like they won't do that. I don't think it'll be like another 5 episodes and then one in the future again. Or at least that's what I don't think it will be. I think it'll either be like what Chirag said, they figure some stuff out and start time traveling, or possibly doing something like that, or yeah.
Maybe the Galanthe becomes like a portal or something. Have you guys seen the 3rd Matrix movie?
Yeah.
I think it's like Revolutions or something. You know how Neo travels to the machine city where all the machines are, like, on their planet? Maybe it's something like that, where they all have to travel to the Galanthe planet, where the Galanthe are originally from, to figure out, like, maybe the Galanthe on Earth dies for some reason, but they get the spaceship with its coordinates to the home world, and they just go along and try to go see like, oh, what is this about? How do we fix this or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I kept asking to myself, I was like, how much information are we going to get about the Galati? Because they have two options. They can either keep it this kind of godlike figure that we don't really know how they work, but we have a basic understanding of it, or they can go into precisely how they work and how their rules of society are and the way that they function and why they exist, which could be very interesting as well.
There's also the theory of the whole simulation thing. I feel like that needs more explaining. Like this future has these simulation strips, and that's, kind of like a virtual reality for people, I guess. But these ones look as if they're based in reality. Like, how can they know a reality and create a reality of someone from like the Victorian age and put it on a strip? Are they actual real things, or it's just like, this is what we think it was like in Victoria times? The whole...
Oh, what's interesting, what I'm remembering now in regards to the simulation strips, is one of the soldiers, when they see the farm, says, this looks like something out of a farmer's daughter's sim. So I think it is similar to a dollhouse thing where they can take somebody's lived experience and create a simulation out of it. Now, the question is, how can they do that with somebody from the Victorian era? But I do think that they are like built from people for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, Penance has the technology right now to create kind of robotic looking human beings, or at least metal shells that function. She could gather the technology and create something where she can put her personality possibly, or her mind into something like that, and essentially create like an AI robot or a copy of herself. I don't know, I just feel like there's so many possibilities with everything that we've mentioned. And I'm hoping that no matter which direction they go in, it will be amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking too from the beginning. I said something that would be so interesting because you have these characters like Hugo and Masson. I said there's nothing kind of out of the realm of another touched event happening and creating people that are touched that are otherwise super against the touched. And I was like, that would be really interesting. I mean, that's kind of shifted now that we've seen these 6 episodes, but I remember from the beginning being like, that's totally a possibility. Because if there's anything we know that Whedon shows like to do is like, they'll set up the mythology of the show and then kind of find these holes within the mythology that can play with the rules that they've created. And then that's what creates the shock and the surprise out of these events. And it's like something that would very logically happen, but you didn't necessarily expect to happen.
I don't know if you guys have seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, but in the sequel series, where Korra, there was that character who could take away the bending powers of all the characters. So I feel like with the cure thing that's happening, and even in the X-Men there was a cure. So if there is a cure and Masson kind of weaponizes that cure, or maybe somebody else does, it could become an interesting thing of, Penance gets shot with a little cure dart and she can't make inventions anymore as she originally could. And it's something to contend with, like, who am I without my ability now that I've gotten so attached to it? Am I still worthy? Can I still do something important?
I mean, it reminds me of the episode of Buffy where it's like her 18th birthday and they inject her with something that takes away her Slayer powers. And it's like, that's the first time she's dealing with, oh my God, I'm normal for the most part. And she has she realizes how important her power is to her.
Yeah, I think you also realize how strong a person can be without their power, though. There's like that flip side to it. Like all these people had, well, a lot of them, like Penance, she had like the mindset of an inventor already, and this kind of like just helped her grow. Is there a future where once the Galati, like if they stay in the past and they work with this single Galati to create a better future that just doesn't wind up where that one did, is there a point where the Galati says you don't need these powers anymore and just takes them back from them and they all just go about their regular lives again? But they've all grown as people and they're all still got like these traits. Like Penance would still be an inventor, I think. But she just wouldn't see the energy like she does now. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe like have they just got these gifts for a set time that the Galanthy needs them to have them to do whatever it wants them to do. Because, like, if it puts the world right and then the Galanthy goes back to its home planet, does their power that is essentially part of the Galanthy's energy, I would assume, go with it?
What's also interesting is we're assuming that the Galanthy have a planet. I keep thinking back to that little ball in the void of space, and I'm like, maybe they're just like, you know, the omnipresent force that just kind of exists in, like, I don't know, similar to like a being that's like doesn't exist in our dimension, so you can't see them kind of thing, but they like exist around and they don't really need a planet kind of thing.
Yeah, they just kind of like drift through space, and you'd hope in however long that they've existed, possibly since the dawn of time, drifting around the universe, that they go to planets and they help people. And then they come to Earth and humans just screw it up. I'll move on to some letters from listeners and see what they've got to say. So we're going to open up the Nevers mailbox and see what our listeners have to say. This is an email from Kathy B. I loved how you matched some of the Nevers characters with Joss Whedon Firefly characters. On thinking about that, Amalia fits with River. River is also a violent personality who was experimented on and sees things as a result. I always thought Amalia and Malady were in an insane institution together. That would explain why Amalia said they don't have funerals where she came from, no time and no space, because in an asylum there is no space to bury anyone and the body is disposed of immediately. The fact that she woke up knowing things that she shouldn't could be that she wasn't drugged enough and knew what was going on, maybe with Sarah / Malady. I also saw more scars on Amalia, but I wasn't sure if that was where she was cut in episode 1 and shot in episode 2. The preview of episode 6 shows Amalia in a padded cell with Lavinia. Lavinia says to her, "I thought you'd be miles away by now. Is this a flashback?" Malady also mentioned that she remembered a black in a doctor's coat. Could Horatio have been a doctor at the asylum and helped Amalia to escape? That might be why she left Sarah behind. Mr. True may have committed Amalia for some secrets she knew. Enjoy your podcast. Thank you, Kathy B. So I think they're all good theories. Obviously now we know, like we've seen now, the backstory of Amalia and Malady at the insane asylum.
Yeah, Kathy's getting a lot of it banged on. But I feel like for me, the easier comparison to River for me is still Malady, because like both of their brains got messed with. Both of them speak in that broken poetry language. Amalia feels more like a Malcolm Reynolds kind of, because if you'll remember in the Firefly pilot episode, we see Mal fighting in this crazy war, just like Zephyr was. But like we see Mal kissing the cross around his neck, because in that moment he still has faith, and then when the promised backup doesn't arrive, that was his moment of losing faith. So Mal doesn't really believe in anything greater than himself and his crew and survival until the movie Serenity, when he finally finds a cause, a mission to fight for and to die for. So Amalia is also kind of lost hope after fighting for so long, and like as we talked about earlier, the show is kind of like her journey to regaining the hope and regaining a mission.
I personally appreciate the I have not heard somebody compare Malcolm to Amalia, and I like that, because of course everybody was going Amalia's Buffy, and I was like, no, they're totally different.
All right. We have an email from our friend Berzer. He says, "Hiya, one thing I love about the Whedonverse is how well each episode is constructed. In every episode of Buffy, Angel, Firefly, and Dollhouse, there is an overhanging theme or perhaps even a kind of thesis statement of the day. This theme affects everything. It affects the plot, both the main plot and the individual plot of every character. Furthermore, it affects the tone and the visual style. Certain scenes are played for laughs in one episode, even though a similar scene would have been played absolutely straight in another episode. So far, The Nevers has taken a much more serialized approach to its storytelling. Chirag pointed out that the first episode touched and deals heavily with betrayal, and it is true that every episode does have its own plot and may focus more strongly on some of the show's themes, but I still feel like the episodes are much less internally consistent and distinct from one another than we are used to from a Whedonverse show. The show has also has been quite linear so far. We are moving in a single direction, learning more and more as we go. I hope the second half of the season will have time for some stops and detours. At this rate, the show will eventually run out of secrets. I think the show needs to take some time to dwell on and explore the parts of the tapestry that has already been revealed. I must admit that the half-season finale did some great work by going back to some points that had only been alluded to before to the show rather than tell what happened. I guess I sound very negative, so I want to point out that there are many advantages to the serialized approach, and the episodic approach of older shows certainly had its disadvantages. Can't wait to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for your email, Berzer. I think you're totally right. I think the serialized nature of modern TV makes it less distinguishable from all the other episodes. Kind of like they're built to blend in together for the binge watchers. But you know, like going back to old TV before Netflix binge days, every episode was more episodic and unique and distinguishable, and all of them had something different to say from the previous one or the next one. But I don't know if that was necessarily the better approach, because of course a lot of it is just like network motivated so they can syndicate episodes to fill up time slots and stuff. But I don't know. I like the balance, and I think it was episode 2 where the betrayal was such a strong thematic through line and had that coherence to it, which I really enjoyed about episode 2. And the other episodes, you're right, didn't have that same thematic internal consistency that we see, like in Firefly, for example, where every episode is so different from the other episodes. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I definitely agree. We had kind of mentioned this before and touched on the same points that Chirag just mentioned, but I do think that one thing that kind of like does place this within the Whedonverse of other shows is what they all kind of do, even in the episodes themselves, is the metaphor isn't hidden to the viewer. The metaphor is usually like pretty like ham-fisted and in your face, and because the metaphor is so obvious that you don't even have to question it, exploring the characters becomes more interesting because you're no longer trying to figure out what this metaphor is. And The Nevers, I feel like, does the same thing, but on a larger scale. So I kind of look at these first 6 episodes. Like when they finished, I was like, wow, that's a really good pilot. Like I understand what the mission is now. Where this show did the same thing. It like, I mean, come on, it's so obvious that this is about like oppression and the oppression of people and, you know, men in charge of society. Whereas that was so obvious from the beginning that it allows them to do all these interesting things that led up to where we are now. And it could have been really hard to balance making individualized episodes with all these different themes and elements because there is so much more going on with the mysterious nature of the show, which I think just lends itself to being serialized.
Yeah, I think I mentioned when we started the podcast that I like this show because each episode is kind of... It doesn't have a set plan that like they follow a route every episode. Every episode's been kind of different so far. Whereas with like Buffy and Angel, you get the whole... There's always, you know, a baddie or a monster they're going after each episode. They beat it, move on to the next one. Dollhouse has like the assignment or the engagement they go on every episode. Firefly... While being very different, every episode they're going on some kind of like adventure. Whereas this is kind of, you know, and they all have their themes that run through overall, but they kind of like takes that longer time to get to. This I like because not only do we get to the point pretty quickly, but every episode kind of has a different structure. So for me, I just find it like really entertaining and not really like anything else I've ever watched because it's all over the place but also really well organized and put together at the same time.
I feel like it's less of a conscious choice from the writers to say we're going to present it in this way. I do feel like it's a little bit more of that's just the way TV is now, because I could very easily take what we have of the Nevers right now and put it into that episodic format. Like I could see it being a 22 episode run where the first 5 episodes is Penance and True kind of gathering a different person that's coming to the orphanage. So that's why I feel like it's because of the product of TV is the ways now, as opposed to like a conscious choice to be like, this is how we want to present it.
But I think this is a much better way. I think I don't know. I feel like I would have enjoyed it if it was the other way, like you say, like loads of filler episodes where they're getting people to come to the orphanage and do whatever else, and we slowly learn what's happening. But I'm thoroughly enjoyed the way that this has been put together. And I get that viewers might think that, I don't know, maybe it's not going to have a very long run, but especially for Whedon fans, like with Firefly and Dollhouse, we're kind of used to some shows being short-lived. And it might be something that Joss Whedon was fearful about with his runs with previous kind of TV studios and what they've done to his shows.
I don't know, maybe the second half of it will have a much better performance than the first half did critically and in terms of the audience reaction, but if it doesn't have the reaction, then a second season is kind of in jeopardy, which means the story as it unfurls will have to be a lot more, I don't want to say it'll have to come out more quickly or it'll have to resolve more definitely, but a lot of the secrets that might have been expanded to season 2, 3, 4, I think will have to, be condensed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shows I've watched on like Netflix and stuff, and because they have so much product and so many TV shows, they cancel stuff really easily. Like, oh, that show's been cancelled and you've had one season and you're never going to know what happened, right? And it's really frustrating. So if you go into a TV show with the fear that you might get cancelled within 1 or 2 seasons, then hopefully you're going to be able to at least deliver 1 or 2 concise seasons that people are going to love and can watch on their own. And because you don't want to like get halfway through a story and have all these questions and then you get cancelled and they're never going to be answered, or you end up having to make comic books or whatever about them that majority of the viewers are not going to go and read. And yeah, so I don't know. I think short and sweet with TV sometimes better. You mentioned earlier, Tyler, that Walking Dead, before it got bad, there's a prime example of a show that I watched the first few seasons and thought this is pretty good, and then it just kind of destroyed itself, in my opinion. We have another email from Lee. This is about his thoughts on episode 6. So, hello, I love the podcast. Thank you both for making it and putting your time and effort into it. It really helps to make sense of the show. I wanted to throw out a few thoughts that I had. So earlier in the season, Malady calls Amalia the woman who sheds her skin and says that God told her about the woman who sheds her skin. That makes me think that, besides seeing and remembering the Galati, Malady received information from it or understood its language. I'm interested to know more about the communication and the relationship between Malady and the Galati in the future. Secondly, I think that Lavinia is trying to harvest the power of the touch to heal her paralysis. So even though she's not necessarily evil, I think she's interested in the touch for selfish reasons. And then thirdly, I just really love the scene from the asylum where the older woman is essentially teaching Stripe how to be a well-mannered Victorian woman. It was just a fun little snippet and I really enjoyed it. I'm excited to watch the show through again and see what Easter eggs are there. Any updates as to when we should expect the next 6 episodes? Thank you, Lee. Right, let's go through this one by one. So the first one, the woman who sheds her skin. Yeah, I think I covered this bit earlier, like what I think anyway about the communication, the relationship between Malady and the Galati, that perhaps, she doesn't understand the language like Myrtle does, that it's more of an emotional relationship and that's how they communicate. Because even in the future where you see like the Doctor with the Galati in person, is almost like an animal and they're not talking, and even though I don't know, they talk about how they're connected and the spores let them communicate, but we don't get any instances or a glimpse that anyone's actually ever had a full conversation with the Galati.
Well, it has a language that was interpretable by Myrtle, and we do know that when it was raining spores in the future, a lot of the people who got rained on were able to understand its language. But I don't know if the scientists in the bunker were of that population.
So Lee thinks that Lavinia's harvesting the power of the touch to heal her paralysis.
I think that's right.
Yes. I agree.
I think that's definitely at least part of her goal. I'm kind of with you that she's not necessarily evil as well. I think I've been fighting the Lavinia corner from the beginning, and I'm hoping that there'll be some form of redemption possibly once all the orphans know what's going on.
I don't think there's a way that you can like sit there and be okay with lobotomy and also not have a selfish motive. Like I can't. There's no way I can like in my mind I can't do the psychological Sudoku to figure out the math of how they're gonna redeem her without her being dying or.
Oh, I think she'll die.
Yeah, for sure she's gonna die.
It's a dying redemption. Like if she figures
There's
out,
no way.
If she knows what the orphans are going to be fighting for, and if she knows from Amalia what the true heritage of the Galanthi are, and she kind of gets pulled away from the crazy doctor, will she help them? I don't know. Because these are people that she actually has a relationship with. All these randomers that are being pulled in off the street, she doesn't know them, right? But like Amalia actually has some form of relationship with, and especially like her brother is one of the touched. There'll be a turning point, I'm sure, where she's like shocked at what she's been doing. I don't know, maybe. Oh yeah, the scene with the older lady at the orphanage, yeah, basically teaching Zephyr how to be a perfect Victorian lady.
Yeah, I absolutely love Lee, this writer, because in my video I did for this episode, I loved that sequence. I said it reminded me of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and like how some of the asylum patients like are well-mannered individuals that understand how society works, but ironically are in an institution and like... You know, we don't really know why that woman is there to begin with, but in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, some of them like kind of prefer to be in the asylum. So I thank you, Lee. I appreciate you appreciating that theme.
I didn't think of that because it's true. They're all in an asylum, and yet they know how to perform society. Like they can perform a noble person who's normal and all that manners and politeness. And it really is
totally Yeah, like I could see this woman just being like, I understand how it all works. Mm-hmm. I prefer to reject it. Because she's like reading the paper too. Like she's just very interesting, that woman.
It reminded me of Eliza Doolittle trying to learn how to speak. Okay. I can move on to the next email. We have an email from Larry Geller. Subject, from the Overthinking Stuff department. I think we're all from there. Dear Laura and Chirag, and I think she also wrote Tyler. I'll add that in. I thought Ferryman was an odd name for a come for sex club and wondered if it was a subtle play on words by Joss, not Hugo Swan, with the similarly sounding word pheromone, which means something that draws animals to a place where sex partners await. Say pheromone 5 times fast. Pheromone. I got you. Love the pod. Thank you, Larry Geller. So I think that's a great observation. I'm on board. It totally makes sense. In addition to that, I think it's also definitely a reference to the ferryman who conveys the souls of the dead across the river of Styx to the dark kingdom of Hades in Greek mythology, which is why Hugo has those coins. Because in ancient Greece, like when someone dies, they'd place coins on their eyes, so in the afterlife they'd have fare to pay the ferryman. And also like the Greek reference plays because to a noble English society, the Greeks were probably considered these freaky, sex-crazed pagans and, you know, doing all their artwork and stuff.
Yeah, I thought the same, that it's just kind of like, you know, you give the ferryman a coin and he takes you to the underworld, and this is an underground sex club full of sin, you know, it's like the underworld or hell. But it is, yeah, I didn't think about it. It does very, very sound like pheromone. So it might be that it's also a kind of play on words.
Multiple meanings. All right. Thank you. And we have an email from Thomas Harrison. They write, I thought the technique used to tell the backstory was brilliant. I've already watched this episode twice, second time with subtitles turned on so as to catch every bit of dialogue. The reveal of the stripe as future Amalia was well done. Nice to see Claudia Black again. Fleshing out Amalia's backstory made me think back to episode 1 and the strange greeting Penance and Amalia would share and didn't seem strange any longer. Penance. You look fine today, Mrs. True. Amalia, I think so too. Keep up the good work, guys. Thank you, Tom, for your email. I do love that greeting that they have between them. I love how it punctuates every act of the first episode, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the best episode. Aside from my fanhood for episode 2, episode 1 is my favorite.
Episode 1 was one of the best pilots I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, I think I mentioned it on our podcast that, you know, even some of my favorite shows ever take at least a couple episodes to kind of like fully get into. Whereas this, I was in from like the first moment. Like just the first moment you meet Amalia and Penance is like, I love them. They're the best duo ever. Yeah, I can't wait to see what happens. And yeah, it didn't disappoint.
And that opening scene without any dialogue took me in. Loved it.
And I've been watching a lot of them with subtitles now, just because of like some of the stuff that our listeners have picked up on with watching with the subtitles. So is
people don't do that normally.
See, I've never. I see memes all the time that are like always watch Netflix or whatever with the subtitles on, because a lot of the time they're just automatically on and you don't really notice. But I never watch things with the subtitles. But because otherwise,
just out of curiosity, when you put the subtitles on, does it tell you what Myrtle is saying?
No, it does not. It says untranslated.
Yeah, it just says speaking something in a different language.
Another language. Yeah, the only reason I put it on is because sometimes the accents are hard for me to understand, so I want to make sure I understand all of it. So maybe that's why you don't, Laura.
It's also the sound mixing. Sometimes with shows it's really hard with the music and all the Foley they put in. Sometimes it's not leveled great and you can't really hear what characters are saying. And especially this, like, there's a lot of dialogue and there's a lot of characters that speak a lot, so it's like quite helpful. Because I watch when I do watch like foreign stuff or anime and that, I watch it with the subtitles, so I'm used to like really paying attention to it. So then when I'm watching a show like this where I don't need the subtitles, I find myself paying too much attention to the subtitles, and then I miss like some of what's going on when I could be paying like all my attention to the show itself. Moving on, we have an email from Judy. Your podcast helps, but still don't like the show.
You want to meet me outside, Judy?
She says, hello, I had high hopes for the Nevers, but it's never lived up to the trailers. I've stuck with some pretty convoluted TV series like Legion, Watchmen, Westworld, Lovecraft's Country, to name a few, but I just can't get myself to care about the Nevers, despite some marginally interesting, vaguely fleshed out characters and nice costumes. I do think your podcast discussions are a decent attempt to help viewers understand the story. I don't expect you to read this on air. It's a thumbs down from me. This is Judy in Santa Cruz. Thank you, Judy. I think like what we would... I mean, I guess we're all on board. We love the show from episode 1, like Tyler just said, that it was the best pilot ever. I do get, though, that it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot thrown in. It's kind of, like I said, all over the place, but I find also very well organised. I can understand why people might not like it.
Oh, absolutely. I had a whole conversation with a friend of mine that doesn't like it, and it comes down to neither of these are negative or positive, but there's two different types of viewers of media. There's active viewers and passive viewers. Some people like to be given the information, where that's a passive viewer, whereas an active viewer likes to kind of be like one step ahead of the story and trying to dissect. So I think it just comes down to different ways that you like to absorb media.
Judy, I've triangulated your location and I'm coming for you in Santa Cruz. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it's totally cool. It's not for everyone. It's a very dense show. It's like a triple fudge chocolate cake, very dense, very, very, it's not simple to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the subtext in the show is very there. I mean, I had a whole friend that didn't realize that Frank was gay after the third episode. And I was like, that's right. Like if you weren't truly in it, I can understand why you would miss something like that.
Yeah, I mean, my mum watched it and she loved it, but she's like me. We don't necessarily my only down thing for this show maybe is that there's like a bit too much like sex and nudity. I don't mind it so much when it's in the Ferryman's Club because it's kind of like, well, that's in the story, kind of got to be there. But like with the rest of it, I'm kind of like, whenever it comes to TV shows or movies, if I don't feel like it 100% has to be there to convey the story or the characters, then I don't I just don't need it to be there. Like, for me, that's my personal, like, viewing preferences is, like, I'm happy with no sex and no nudity. That's just for me. But I feel like I like the show so much that I can look past it. And there's not as much as I thought there was going to be. From the beginning,
I was just about to say the same thing, that I was like, I actually think it's pretty tame, like after like Game of Thrones, where that was so sexual, and like that's kind of what got people into the show. I was expecting that with this, and I was surprised to see less of it than I thought I was going to see.
Yeah.
I totally get what you guys are saying, but I don't know if you guys remember the character that they were talking about, Bendy Wendy.
Yeah.
I think they really missed an opportunity over there to really do some really good sex and nudity with Bendy Wendy.
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
But other than that, I agree with you, Laura.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, I guess. But
yeah, we need more male nudity.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think there were some bits that my mum kind of. She's one of those viewers. She's seen The Matrix. We watch them like every few years. We'll sit and watch all the Matrix films. And she loves them. She enjoys them because of their action and everything. But she doesn't to this day understand the story. But she'll still watch it. So this, I think she watched it. She really enjoyed it. And then after she'd watched it, and I sat down to kind of discuss it with her and say my favourite parts and like what we've been talking about on the podcast, she was like, I didn't catch that. And I didn't notice this. So I think it is one of those shows where you definitely... Unless you've really hated it, you need to you can go back and watch it and really kind of delve in a lot more than you did on the first watch. So, yeah, who knows? Maybe the second half will be better for you, Judy. I've got a couple of emails now that are kind of about the same thing, so I'll read them both and then we will discuss. So the first one is from Cassie Craig. I've been looking for clues that the Mad Doctor is the other time traveller. In episode 2, when we first see Mrs. Bidlow come down to visit, he says, "Ain't we got fun?" She replies that he is confounded by the mother tongue. "Ain't We Got Fun" premiered on the Fanchon and Marco show Satires of 1920, where it was sung by Arthur West. Bing Crosby recorded it in 1960. Maybe I missed one of you catching this, but I'm almost sure if you had, there would be no question as to who the other traveller was. I just love this pod, so glad I found it. Cassie. The second email is from Tash, LOL. I'm rewatching The Nevers now that I've watched it all once and listened to your podcast. I wanted to catch all the little nuggets you shared during your podcast as I watched a second time. Anyways, Chirag mentioned that he believes that Dr. Haig also travelled back in time with Zephyr, and I agree. And I have proof. Maybe. I was thinking that throughout the season he might have let things slip. Sang lyrics or quoted movies or books from the future. I think I caught one. At the end of episode 2, Exposure, when Lavinia goes down to the mine to see the new development of the Galanthi, Dr. Hay quotes a song by saying, "Ain't we got fun?" And Lavinia says something about him being American and not speaking the mother tongue. But then she says, "This is not fun, this is war." So I thought I knew those words or lyrics. And sure enough, they first came out in the 1920s and were popularised in the 50s and 60s. The lyrics were symbolic of the Roaring Twenties. So no one in Victorian England would have heard this phrase, which is why Lavinia just chalks it up to him being American. Now I want to search for more anachronisms. So thank you, Cassie and Tash. I didn't pick up on this. I've never heard of this song.
That is a good catch.
Yeah, seriously.
I think that's definitive proof. I think we proved it.
Yeah, I didn't know this song. And when I read these letters, I was kind of like, Chirag was right. He is from the future and this proves it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and to add to the proof, he's the one that starts the line that says, "Did you think you were the only one that hitched a ride?" And I only know that from the subtitles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like the line goes, Did you think, and it says Dr. Haig next to it is speaking, and then it changes to a woman's voice that says, "We're the only one that hitched a ride." That's what led me to believe Lavinia too, but I seem to be the only one on that side.
I was about to say, it is a female voice that I thought I heard say that. That was my only thing that I was hedging my bets on, but now that you say that...
But it is funny because I didn't pick it up until the subtitle moment that Dr. Haig starts the line, and then it shifts into a female voice.
It's like the whole series has had all these big mysteries, but they've actually been throwing the answers in our face the entire time, if you pay attention. Literally every twist and turn has pretty much been been forecast in the show.
Oh yeah, it's going to be one of those shows where you go back and you show it to a friend, and you're watching along with them, and Amalia's going to say some line that gives away everything, and you're going to be like, they're going to know what's going on, like they're going to figure it out.
Yeah, Cassie and Tasha, LOL, you're brilliant.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks for doing the research. We completely missed that part. So yeah. If anyone else has any comments, theories, or questions, you can tweet it to us at theneverspodcast without an A. You can also send us your letter or a voice recording to theneverspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll read all the letters in an upcoming episode.
I wanted to mention something just in terms of Game of Thrones. I just want to throw this out there. So the character of Bran Stark, you know who I'm talking about, Tyler, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers will. It feels to me like his character, the Three-Eyed Raven, they kind of divided into several Nevers characters. Like, they gave the bird powers to Augustus, the wheelchair to Lavinia, and the visions to Amalia. I just wanted to throw that out there.
I love that, because I definitely connected Augie and Bran with the warg power, but I didn't even think about the other two. I love that.
Exactly. Any final thoughts for you guys?
I can't wait to see what happens. I'm along for the ride.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when it's going to happen. Like, I think it's filming soon. There's filming happening soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't know, obviously, with the current restrictions, how long it takes, how long it's projected to take, and when it will be. I think we're predicted early or possibly autumn again next year, maybe.
All I really hope for is, we're changing showrunners, of course, and the rest of the writing crew is staying the same. So I just hope that it does seem like they have a very, very distinct plan at what they want to do. And I just hope that they kind of stick with that, because it would be such a shame if things were kind of omitted from what they wanted to do because they didn't think it was important or something like that, where it could have led to something really awesome with what they've set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't get watered down.
Yeah.
We don't want to, hopefully they'll give them kind of free, well, I'm hoping, like you said, they've got the story set out and they kind of know where all these characters are going to go and what's happening. Like with the whole Star Wars trilogy, and, we got one director for the first film and then a different director and then another one, like back to the first. So the movies just kind of aren't coherent. It's like, that's the big example of there wasn't a clear vision or storyline of where they wanted to go from point A to point B. Like, even if you've got different directors, writers, whoever, like, if there's a set story, at least we know what we thought was going to happen is going to happen. Like, it'd be really upsetting if, like, everything just went randomly crazy different. But,
I was going to say, especially when you're dealing with time travel, you have the ability to do really cool things if you plan it out. And I immediately think to, if there's any super sci-fi fans listening, to Babylon 5, which I'm actually currently in the middle of watching. And the reason I was interested is because it was actually planned. It was one of the first shows that were completely planned out for 5 seasons that was on network television, and it deals with time travel. So what's really cool that the show can do is, like, in season 2, they will see their future selves doing the time traveling, that by the time you get to season 4 or 5, they end up time traveling to that point. So it's like things can be set up really interestingly, especially with time travel, if you have it planned and you stick to it.
So I wanted to kind of, before we wrap it up, I wanted to talk about the overarching themes, because that's kind of like the main work that I did before we began this recap. Is I wanted to think about what some of the questions were overall. So for me, some of the questions, like, are the Galati benevolent, like Knitter was believing? Are they malevolent, like the Free Lifers and perhaps Lavinia believe? Are the powers a gift, like Penance believes? Are they a curse, like Lucy and Lord Masson believe? And then we're going to go forward and see, like, should we put our stock in the hope of Mary, Knitter, and the Galati, who pretty much were all killed? Or should we put our stock in despair, in the despair of Stripe and Lucy? And then one other thing that I wanted to get out there was this theme, like, aside from the theme of betrayal, one of the biggest themes that I noticed and that we've talked about for, like, the last month is the theme of resisting change and archaism, which is represented by Lord Masson, versus futurism, the idea of a better world. this thing happens, I feel like, through every generational transition, where the previous generation kind of sees the younger generation as a menace or a threat or a radical change that upsets their power structure. And when I was looking over all these episodes, I dug up this quote that it reminded me of. So this is a quote. "Children, they have bad manners, contempt for authority, they show disrespect for elders, and love chatter in place of exercise, and they no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents and tyrannize their teachers. Children are now tyrants." So now that sounds like something like your boomer grandpa would say, right?
Yes.
That's a quote from Socrates in 470 BC about the young people of his
Wow.
day. That's what this reminded me of, like the Freudian idea of the tension between parent and child, because the parent is destined to be replaced by the child, and it's just a matter of like how soon. And it reminds me of the motif of patricide in almost every mythology and theology on the planet. Like the obvious example is Oedipus, but in Greek myth you have Uranus, who gets overthrown by Cronus, his son, who gets overthrown by his son Zeus. Like nobody wants to lose their power and get replaced. Like Cronus swallows all his children to avoid getting replaced. So it feels like in this show, Lord Masson is not just in all likelihood locking up his own child in a dungeon and that kind of parent-child tension, but I think it's also representative of his generation and his status quo and the British Empire as it was, kind of beefing with the British Empire that could be the more progressive, the more, the idea of reparations, the idea of progress, the idea of change, all of these things. I thought for me that really encapsulates these 6 episodes that we saw. If I had to boil it down to a theme, that would be the theme that I pick. But that's my final thought, really.
Wonderfully said.
I'll say a much less eloquent and short final thought. I thought this show so far is awesome, and I can't wait for more.
Agreed.
Concise.
Wrapping up now, that'll do it for this podcast. Well, this episode of the podcast. If you enjoy the Nevers podcast, we would, of course, like it if you left us a positive review. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon Music Podcasts, and YouTube, or wherever else you stream your podcasts. For more Nevers-related content, you can find us on the web at hbothenevers.com, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at hbothenevers, and at the Nevers Podcast, and also at the Nevers Podcast without an A. Comments or questions can be sent to theneverspodcast@gmail.com, and please also rate and review our podcast and help us reach more listeners. So, that's all for today's episode. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Thank you.
It's been really nice having another voice to join us and get some more crazy theories.
Yeah, this has been so nice. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. You're awesome.
You guys are awesome. You do a great job.
Would you like to share your social media and stuff so people can find you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You had mentioned earlier that you can find me at Tyler Austin on YouTube. You could just search Tyler Austin the Nevers, because I do share a name with a New York Yankee and some real estate guy on YouTube, so that's not me. I've been working on videos, that follow the Nevers, and I kind of take a filmmaking, editing, writing kind of approach and give you a little visual show while I do it. And I'm also on Twitter at Tyler Austin.
Awesome. Thank you, Chirag, of course. Do you want people to find you online, or you're a mysterious being and you just want to be hiding in the shadows there?
No, you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at Mayan Mailman. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me time traveling back to the first episode of this podcast and telling you everything.
If anyone wants to find me, you can find me, the best stuff's on my Instagram, which is LauraJP1721. Yeah, thank you everyone who's listening and everyone that has listened to every episode so far. I hope you're enjoying it. We'll be back with new episodes, reviewing the next six episodes when we get them. Until then, we encourage you to listen to old episodes and keep an eye out on our socials for any updates, and stay tuned for season 2 of our In Conversation With series. So yeah, until next time, this has been the Nevers Podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Before we move on, I'm going to run to the bathroom quickly.
I might join you while you're doing that.
Oh yeah, you guys go ahead, I'll vamp. So, the weather. There's a cold front coming in, for me at least, from Canada. So I'm wearing a jacket.
This episode of the Nevers Podcast was written, produced, and edited by Matthew Yamanashi at Culture Inject Studios. The intro and outro music was produced by Guilherme Moraes. We are more than just a podcast. We're a fan community. You can keep up to date on the Nevers and chat with other fans by visiting hbothenevers.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search HBO The Nevers, all one word, and click that follow button. The Nevers Podcast is not endorsed by Mutant Enemy, Warner Media Entertainment, or any of its subsidiaries, including Home Box Office, HBO, and is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. The Nevers and all names, pictures, and audio clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.
Fucking electricity.